Hi, I'm Ananya and welcome to a slow reader's journey. I've been wanting to do this for the longest time now, but we're finally here. I have been in love with reading ever since I was a child. I picked up my first 100-page novel when I was in 4th standard. It was a scholastic adaptation of A Sweet Life of Zack and Cody episode. Ever since then, books have been such a constant source of happiness and joy and calm, and also heartbreak and sadness that has broken me for all this time. And I never thought that I would part ways with books or I could get rid of my reading habit. But at some point I did. And I tried and failed to break this reading block which lasted for years. But I couldn't. Until 2 years ago, when I cracked the code and I figured out how to get back to reading. And that is what my first video is, 6 ways to get back to reading. Because that's why this channel exists, because I got back to reading and I hope I can help you do that. Number 1. This is the most basic and generic sounding one out of the list, but it's the most important one. Finish a book. Finish any book. A short story, a long story, a favorite author, something that you've never read before but somebody has recommended to you a lot. The addictive feeling of having finished a book, of having gone through that journey, can really propel you forward, and it's one of the first steps to breaking a reading block. A friend of mine once said this to me, that you can only finish a book if you're reading the right book. And by the right book, he meant something that you're really interested in right now. Something that's so engaging to you that when you close that book, do you still keep thinking about it? Because if you do, only then you're going to go back to that book and open it up and be motivated enough to finish it because you're just that interested in it. Pick the right book for you, not what you should be reading and should not be reading. There is no should be and should not be reading. If there is, we'll talk about it later. Pick the right book for you, something that screams to you, something that's on your mind. Maybe it's a TV series which you really like. Find a book that's kind of similar to that or set in that zone. Find a non-fiction topic if you're a non-fiction reader that interests you right now. Find a book about that and read that. Finish a book, and then we'll get started on our journey to breaking this reading block. Number 2, talking about books and making reading an activity. When I finished a book after 3 or 4 years, I was very happy. But that may as well have been a one-off incident and not necessarily the end of my reading block. But I went online and I shared my thoughts about that book. And so many people replied because they had read that book and they were eager to share their views about it. And that is when I realized that even if I was on a years-long reading block, the world wasn't. People are reading and it feels so great to share that feeling with each other because we're in this together. Also, tracking. Goodreads and Storygraph are such good companions because when you give reviews to a book, this whole thing becomes a very extensive activity. The minute you finish a book, you're excited to go there and update your ratings and write a review. And also these graphs are very cool, right? Number 3, be okay with DNFs. If you don't like a book, don't spend months and months trying to finish it. I was a reader like that where I would be like, I have to finish a book that I've started. But that doesn't necessarily have to be true. This realization came the hard way because when you are in a reading block and when I was trying to get back to it, I was picking up a lot of books that I loved, but I just simply could not finish them and would have to leave them in the middle because I couldn't read. That was an involuntary thing. You can voluntarily choose to not finish these books if they're not bringing that joy and if they're not sparking that interest in you that you need right now to jumpstart this journey of reading again. So if you're picking the right book, as we talked about, is not an easy task. And if you have not picked the right book on your first go, which you probably won't, which I did not and could not do for 3 years, that's okay. Leave that book in the middle, do not finish it, and be okay with that and move on to the next one, because what's important is to get this machine rolling. Did I say that? Number 4, change your format. This one isn't just helpful when you're in a huge reading block. But even when, say, you're not in a rut, but today is a bad reading day, you want to read, but you can't seem to be able to, this one really helps. Changing the format breaks the monotony. If you're reading a physical book and struggling to focus on it, try reading it on your Kindle or your phone, because it just makes it that much more accessible. You can read it in shorter stints of reading, so you're still connected with the book. If not a digital format, maybe if you've tried audiobooks before, and then we're gonna talk about it more later, you can try listening to audiobooks if you don't find the time to read. I've currently moved cities and that always disrupts my reading. I haven't picked up a physical book in a while, but I sleep to my audiobook every night. I listen to it when I wake up, I listen to it when I travel. I'm still surrounded by a story and I'm still connected to a book, and my reading journey is not stopping. Number 5, borrow or read together. You can borrow books from your friends, or you can probably choose to decide and read a particular book together to again make it more of an activity, more of a shared experience. You can join online book clubs, and you don't even have to socialize and be a part of the conversation if you don't want to, if you don't have the energy to. You can just choose those online book clubs because these are people who are telling you this is a book that you can read, and they sometimes set up these little timelines. You can use it for yourself to keep yourself on track and read something that you did not have to put your mind to in choosing and picking out, but something that others find interesting and maybe you want to give it a try, something that's new. Number 6, and my most favorite, another reason why this video had to be my first video in my BookTube introduction. Number 6 is BookTube. When I finished a book 2 years ago, I was over the moon. It was after 3.5 years that I was able to finish a book. But then I was lost. I had no idea how to find the next book that I wanted to read. I went on to Amazon, I went to bookstores, and I looked around, but I was confused. I had no idea which book to pick because I did not want to pick the wrong book, right? I did not want the wrong follow-up. Because what if I was not able to finish the second one? Was this reading habit going to go again? That is when I searched random things on Google and opened one random video, and that video was by Alexandra Roslin, one of my most favorite YouTube channels. And I found a book out of her recommendations. I read it, I finished it, and that is when I knew I had started back on my journey of reading. I continued talking about it, I continued sharing my views about these books, and I continued going back to BookTube to find more and more and more book recommendations. You're surrounded by books. You watch BookTube when you're not reading, and you're still connected to books. The idea of reading is still in your head, and that helps. That helps so much. Here's the list of books that have been a part of this journey of mine of getting back to reading. I'm putting this in the end because I'm not saying that these are the books which will help you get back to reading. We'll have a separate video for that. But these are the ones which relate to these steps, and because of these steps I found these books and they helped me a lot. The book that I finished reading was City of Bones by Cassandra Clare, part of the Mortal Instruments series. I was nostalgic about the time when we used to read all these fantasy series. What a time, right? What a time. I'd seen a TV series which was very much onto that vibe and I was reminded of it. So I realized that this is one series from that time that I had not read. So I picked this book up. It's very easy to read through. I finished it in a few days and I was shocked at myself. Like, oh, am I done? Is this over? And I was ecstatic about it. The books that I did not finish. The Marble Collector and Lyrebird by Cecelia Ahern, and The Man Called Uwe by Frerick Backman. Cecelia Ahern had been one of my favorite authors growing up, so I wanted to give her a try to get me out of the reading block. And I had only heard praise and praise and praise for The Man Called Uwe. But I could not finish these at that time, not to say that they were not good books, but I could not enjoy them at that moment for whatever reason it was. And I chose to give them rest and decide to get back to them later when the time is right For then, I chose to move on to different books and see what was working for me. The book that I read in a different format was Love and Gelato. A cute love story that's perfect to be read in an ebook format because you can read it in short snippets while you're on the go and still feel all the joy that it imparts. The book that I read with others to make an experience out of it was The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Jenkins. I love Jenkins. I had just found an online book club that was going to read this book. I joined that book club because I found an excuse to read a book that I'd heard a lot about. And it ended up being one of my most favorite books of all time, and it did help my getting back to reading journey tremendously because of simply how fabulous this book is. We'll talk more about that later. I have gotten back to reading, but I don't read nearly as much as I used to. But that's the journey we're on. That's what Slow Reader's Journey is about. So if you want to follow along to my reading journey, see what I'm reading, get recommendations, lots of views and lots of new different things that you can try with books and just consume bookish content, tag along. Bye.